Animal Farm, Chapter 6, Part 1. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work and did not complain, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and for those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week. And in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who refused to do it would have his food rations reduced by half. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain jobs undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous year, and 2 fields which should have been sown with root crops in the early summer were not sown because the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all of the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to someone, namely, to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals tied ropes around these, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay hold of the rope, even the pigs sometimes joined in at critical moments. They dragged those boulders with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter to pieces below. Transporting the stone when it was once broken was relatively simple. The horses carried it off in cartloads, the sheep dragged single blocks, even Muriel and Benjamin tied themselves into an old cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had been acquired, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. But it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry. And sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to all the rest of the animals on the farm put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up the slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hooves clawing at the ground, and his great sides covered with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overdo himself. But Boxer would never listen to her. His 2 slogans, "I will work harder," and "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with one of the roosters to call him 45 minutes earlier in the morning instead of half an hour, and in his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the site of the windmill unassisted. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they had had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves, and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well, was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animal method of doing things was more efficient and saved work. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from cropland, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of fences and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was need for oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need for seed and fertilizer, besides various tools, and finally, the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be acquired, no one was able to imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon a new policy. From now onwards, Animal Farm would engage in trade with the neighboring farms. Not, of course, for any commercial purpose, but simply in order to obtain certain materials which were urgently necessary. The needs of the windmill must override everything else, he said. He was therefore making arrangements to sell a stack of hay and part of the current year's wheat crop, and later on, if more money were needed, it would have to be made up by the sale of eggs, for which there was always a market in Willingdon. The hens, said Napoleon, should welcome this sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. Once again, the animals were aware of a vague uneasiness. Never to have any dealings with human beings, never to engage in trade, never to make use of money. Had not these been among the earliest resolutions passed at that first triumphant meeting after Jones had been expelled? All the animals remembered passing such resolutions, or at least they thought that they remembered it. The 4 young pigs who had protested when Napoleon abolished the meetings raised their voices timidly, but they were promptly silenced by a tremendous growling from the dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his hand for silence and announced that he had already made all the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come in contact with human beings, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to take the whole burden upon his own shoulders. A Mr. Whymper, a salesman living in town, had agreed to act as the intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every Monday morning to receive his instructions. Napoleon ended his speech with his usual cry of, "Long live Animal Farm!" And after the singing of Beast of England, the animals were dismissed. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm to set the animals' minds at rest. He assured them that a resolution against engaging in trade and using money had never been passed or even suggested. It is pure imagination, probably traceable in the beginning to lies circulated by Snowball. A few animals still felt faintly doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain that this is not something you have dreamed, comrades? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true that nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that they had been mistaken.